Story 1. Story 1, The Whispering Corn. October 31st, 2018. Halloween night. The air, crisp and biting, carried the scent of burning leaves and the faint sweetness of candy corn. My breath plumed before me as I walked down Old Man Hemlock's lane, the gravel crunching rhythmically under my boots. Sarah, my best friend since kindergarten, walked beside me, humming a discordant rendition of Monster Mash. We were headed to the annual bonfire at Farmer McGregor's field, a Halloween tradition in our small, isolated town of Havenwood. "You sure you want to go through here?" Sarah asked, her voice a little shaky. Hemlock's Lane was notorious for being creepy, even in daylight. It was flanked by towering, skeletal corn stalks that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. "It's a shortcut," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Besides, what's the worst that could happen?" Famous last words. As we walked deeper into the lane, the air grew colder, the cheerful sounds of distant laughter fading, replaced by the rustling of the corn. It seemed to press in on us, a living wall that swallowed the last vestiges of the setting sun. The whispering intensified. It wasn't the usual rustle of dry leaves, this was a sibilant murmur, like voices just beyond the range of comprehension. "This is freaking me out, Maya," Sarah whispered, her hand clutching my arm. I tried to laugh it off, but a shiver ran down my spine. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I scanned the cornfield, trying to pinpoint the source of the whispers, but saw nothing. Then, the sky began to shift. The deep indigo of twilight bled into an unsettling violet, streaked with unnatural hues of green and orange. The stars, usually brilliant in our rural sky, were absent, replaced by a swirling, nebulous haze that pulsed with a faint, internal light. What is that?" Sarah stammered, pointing to the sky. My heart hammered in my chest. I'd never seen anything like it. It was beautiful, in a terrifying, alien way. A sense of unease, deeper than anything I'd ever experienced, settled in my stomach. The whispering grew louder, coalescing into distinct words, though I still couldn't understand them. It sounded like an ancient language, spoken from beyond the veil of reality. The air grew thick, heavy, making it difficult to breathe. Suddenly, the corn stalks parted before us, revealing a narrow path leading deeper into the field. At the end of the path, a faint, pulsating light emanated, matching the colors in the sky. "We should go back," I said, my voice barely a croak. Sarah nodded frantically, her eyes wide with fear. But as we turned to leave, a low, guttural chanting began, echoing from the depths of the cornfield. It wasn't human. It was something other. We froze, paralyzed by terror. The chanting grew louder, closer, and the ground beneath our feet began to vibrate. The cornstalk swayed and writhed, as if animated by an unseen force. The violet sky pulsed, the swirling haze descending lower, reaching out towards us like spectral fingers. The whispering intensified, morphing into a cacophony of voices, screaming, pleading, chanting. I felt a pull, a magnetic force drawing me towards the pulsating light at the end of the path. "Maya! Don't!" Sarah screamed, grabbing my arm. But her grip loosened as if some unseen force was pulling me away. I stumbled forward, my feet moving independently of my will. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. The chanting grew louder, drowning out all other sounds, filling my head with an unbearable pressure. Then, I saw them. Silhouettes within the corn, tall and thin, with elongated limbs and heads that seemed to stretch towards the unnatural sky. Their forms shifted and wavered, like reflections in disturbed water. They weren't human. They were something else. I wanted to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. The light at the end of the path grew brighter, blinding. I felt a sharp pain in my head, a tearing sensation, as if my mind was being ripped apart. Then, darkness. I woke up the next morning in my bed, the sun streaming through my window. It was as if nothing had happened. The sky was its normal blue, the cornfield silent and still. Sarah wasn't there. I tried to call her, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I went to her house, but her parents said she hadn't come home. No one had seen her since the previous evening. The police searched the cornfield, but found nothing. No sign of Sarah, no evidence of anything unusual. They dismissed it as a teenage prank gone wrong. But I knew better. The whispers are still there, faint but persistent, at the edge of my hearing. The memory of the violet sky, the chanting, the things in the corn, haunts my dreams. And I can't shake the feeling that something terrible, is watching me, waiting for the next Halloween night. Where is Sarah? What happened in the cornfield? What was that light? What were those things? I don't know. And I'm afraid to find out. The corn whispers, and I listen, trapped in a nightmare I can't escape. Story 2. Story 2, The Whispering Walls. The air, thick with the saccharine scent of fake blood and burnt sugar, hung heavy on Halloween night. My best friend, Sarah, and I, both 18 and brimming with a false sense of invincibility, decided against the usual high school party circuit. Instead, we opted for the local legend, the abandoned Blackwood Manor. You sure about this, Dell? Sarah asked, her voice a little shaky as we approached the wrought iron gates, their rusted hinges groaning like a mournful sigh. Come on, scaredy-cat, I teased, though a shiver danced down my own spine. It'll be fun. Besides, everyone says it's just a story. The story, of course, was the gruesome tale of the Blackwood family, who had perished within the manor walls generations ago under mysterious circumstances. Whispers of hauntings and unexplained occurrences had kept the house vacant ever since. We squeezed through a gap in the gates, the cold metal biting into my palm. The manor loomed before us, a Gothic monstrosity silhouetted against the bruised twilight sky. Broken windows gaped like empty sockets, and the crumbling stone facade seemed to breathe in the eerie moonlight. Inside, the air was stale and dusty, heavy with the scent of decay. We navigated the labyrinthine hallways with the aid of our phone flashlights, their beams cutting through the oppressive darkness. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the creak of floorboards under our weight and the erratic thumping of my own heart. This place is creepy, Sarah whispered, her hand gripping my arm tightly. We explored the decaying rooms, each one a tableau of forgotten lives. A child's rocking horse lay overturned in a corner, its paint chipped and faded. A grand piano, its keys yellowed with age, stood silent in the dusty parlor. The remnants of a half-eaten meal lay on a table in the dining room, the plates covered in a thick layer of dust. It felt as if the occupants had just vanished, leaving their lives frozen in time. As we ascended the grand staircase, a low whisper seemed to slither through the air. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely a breath. Sarah nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "I thought it was you." We continued upwards, the whispering growing louder, more insistent. It seemed to be coming from the walls themselves, a chorus of hushed voices weaving in and out of the silence. We reached the top landing and hesitated, unsure which room to explore first. A sudden gust of wind slammed a door shut somewhere deep within the house, the sound echoing through the empty halls like a gunshot. Sarah jumped, her grip on my arm tightening. "Let's just go, Elle. This isn't funny anymore." I felt a knot of fear twisting in my stomach, but a perverse curiosity kept me rooted to the spot. I wanted to know what was making those whispers. We chose a room at random, pushing open the heavy oak door. It was a bedroom, sparsely furnished with a four-poster bed and a dusty vanity. The whispering was louder here, almost a murmur. It felt as though unseen eyes were watching us, judging us. Then, I saw it. A small, porcelain doll lay on the floor, its glassy eyes staring up at us. It wasn't the doll itself that unnerved me, but the fact that it hadn't been there a moment ago. "Sarah," I whispered, pointing to the doll. Sarah gasped, her eyes fixed on the porcelain figure. How did that get there?" As we stared at the doll, the whispering intensified, morphing into a low, guttural chant. The air grew colder, and a heavy, suffocating presence filled the room. We were no longer alone. Suddenly, the vanity mirror shattered, sending shards of glass raining down around us. Sarah screamed and we both stumbled backward, scrambling to escape the room. We ran blindly through the darkened hallways, the chanting echoing in our ears. The house seemed to be shifting around us, the walls closing in. We reached the front door and fumbled with the lock, our hands shaking uncontrollably. Finally, the door swung open and we stumbled out into the cool night air. We didn't stop running until we reached the main road, our lungs burning and our hearts pounding in our chests. We looked back at the manor, its dark silhouette looming against the night sky. The whispering had stopped, but the feeling of dread remained. The next day, we returned to Blackwood Manor, desperate for a rational explanation. But the house was locked tight, the gate secured. There was no sign of forced entry, no indication that we had ever been inside. We asked around, but no one knew anything about the unlocked gates or our experience within the manor. The locals simply shrugged and repeated the old stories of the Blackwood family and the haunted house. Years have passed, but I still remember the whispering walls and the feeling of being watched. I can still see the porcelain doll, its glassy eyes staring up at me. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear the whispers again, soft and insistent, just outside my window. I never go near Blackwood Manor again, but the chilling experience lingers, a constant reminder of the unanswered questions and the terror that lurks in the shadows. Was it a shared hallucination? A trick of the mind? Or something far more sinister? I don't know, and that's the most terrifying part of all. Story 3. Story 3, The Whispering Pines. Halloween night, 2008. The wind, a rabid dog let loose, clawed at the old farmhouse, rattling the windows like skeletal fingers tapping for entry. Inside, warm cider steamed in mugs, cinnamon scenting the air. My cousin Sarah and I, barely teenagers, huddled closer to the crackling fire, ignoring the unsettling howl that seemed to emanate from the dense pine forest behind the house. Tell another story, Aunt Martha, Sarah pleaded, her voice barely audible above the wind's fury. Aunt Martha, her face etched with lines like a weathered map, smiled, a glint in her eye. All right, just one more. But then it's off to bed for you too. She began a tale of a witch who lived deep in these very woods, a story woven with local folklore, her voice a soothing balm against the rising storm outside. But even as she spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The shadows seemed deeper, the firelight flickering in a way that distorted the familiar shapes of the room, transforming them into something sinister. When the story ended, the wind howled even louder, a long, mournful cry that sent shivers down my spine. Sarah, her eyes wide, gripped my hand. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. "It's just the wind," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. But the truth was, I'd heard something else beneath the wind's roar, a low, guttural growl, deep and resonant, like a monstrous beast stirring in its lair. Aunt Martha, her face unusually pale, stood abruptly. "I think it's time for bed," she said, her voice tight with an unspoken fear. We followed her upstairs, the floorboards groaning under our weight, each step echoing the unsettling rhythm of my own racing heart. As she tucked us in, I saw her gaze drift towards the window, her eyes fixated on something in the darkness beyond. "Sleep tight," she murmured, her voice strained. "And don't look outside." But I couldn't resist. As soon as she left, I crept to the window, the cold glass pressing against my cheek. The wind whipped the pine trees into a frenzy, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal arms. And then I saw it. A flicker of movement in the shadows. Something large, something dark, moving silently through the trees. It was too far to see clearly, but the sheer size of it, the way it glided through the undergrowth, sent a wave of terror washing over me. I stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. Sarah, awakened by my sudden movement, sat up in bed, her eyes wide with fear. "What is it?" she whispered. I don't know," I stammered, my voice trembling. The next few hours were a blur of terror. We huddled together in the bed, the wind howling outside, punctuated by strange scratching sounds at the windows and doors. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of leaves outside, sent us shrinking deeper under the covers. Just before dawn, the sound stopped. the wind died down and an eerie silence descended upon the farmhouse. Cautiously, I crept back to the window. The first rays of sunlight were filtering through the trees, painting the forest in a soft, ethereal glow. Everything seemed normal, peaceful. Almost. But then I saw it. Footprints. Huge, clawed footprints in the soft earth beneath the window, leading away into the dense pines. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Too big for a bear, too strange for any animal I knew. We didn't tell Aunt Martha what we had seen. She didn't need to know. The fear in her eyes that night, the way she'd stared out the window, told me she knew more than she let on. We left the farmhouse later that day, and I've never been back. But the memory of that night, the howling wind, the scratching sounds, the monstrous footprints, continues to haunt me. Especially on Halloween night, when the wind whispers through the pines, I remember the creature in the shadows, and I wonder what it was that lurked in the woods behind my aunt's house. Years later, I tried to find an explanation. I researched local legends, talked to old-timers in the area, even consulted a wildlife expert. But nothing could account for the size of the footprints, the strange growls, the overwhelming sense of dread that permeated the air that night. The expert suggested it could have been a bear, its tracks distorted by the soft earth. But deep down, I knew it was something else. Something ancient, something primal, something that the rational mind couldn't comprehend. To this day, I can still hear the whispering pines, a constant reminder of that terrifying Halloween night, and the creature that still roams the woods, waiting in the shadows. I often wonder, what would have happened if we had looked outside when those guttural growls were closest? What if Aunt Martha hadn't been there? These questions, like the whispering pines, continue to haunt me, a chilling reminder of the night I encountered the unknown, and the terrifying realization that some things are best left undisturbed, hidden within the darkness of the woods. Story 4. Story 4 are The Whispers of YGG. Halloween Night, 2018. Salem, Massachusetts. The air, thick with the scent of wood smoke and caramel apples, buzzed with a nervous energy. My friend, Sarah, and I, both graduate students researching folklore, were eager to experience the town's legendary celebrations firsthand. We'd rented a small, creaky apartment above a dusty occult shop, its shelves packed with unsettling artifacts, dried herbs, strange masks, and books bound in unsettlingly soft leather. Spooky, right? Sarah grinned, twirling a lock of her auburn hair. I forced a smile, already feeling a prickle of unease I couldn't quite place. The air in the apartment felt stagnant, heavy, like something unseen pressed against my skin. Yeah, spooky, I echoed, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. We ventured out into the throngs of costumed revelers, the streets a kaleidoscope of witches, ghouls, and otherworldly creatures. Laughter echoed off the centuries-old buildings, but it felt forced, as if masking a deeper, more unsettling current. As the night deepened, the crowds thinned, revealing the darker side of Salem's festive facade. We found ourselves in a quiet square, dominated by a towering oak tree, its gnarled branches reaching towards the inky sky like skeletal fingers. The air grew colder, the laughter replaced by a whispering wind that rustled the leaves with an unnerving sibilance. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide. "Hear what?" I asked, straining my ears. Whispering, she replied, her voice trembling. Like someone speaking, but not in any language I recognize. I listened intently, and a chill crawled down my spine. Beneath the wind, a subtle, susurrus sound seemed to emanate from the oak tree itself, a chorus of voices too high, too deep, to be human. It resonated in my bones, vibrating in my teeth. Dismissing it as the wind and our overactive imaginations, we continued walking, but the whispering persisted, growing louder, more insistent. It felt as though the very fabric of reality was fraying, unraveling at the edges. The cobblestone street seemed to shift beneath our feet, the buildings leaning at impossible angles. Suddenly, Sarah stopped, clutching my arm. "Look," she gasped, pointing towards the oak tree. The tree, previously shrouded in darkness, now glowed with an eerie, internal light. Its branches writhed like tentacles, and within its trunk, a pulsating, iridescent orb seemed to breathe. The whispering intensified, coalescing into a single, resonant voice that spoke not to our ears, but directly into our minds. It spoke of vast, unknowable entities dwelling beyond the veil of reality, entities whose very existence defied human comprehension. It spoke of cycles of creation and destruction, of cosmic indifference, and the insignificance of human life. It spoke of YGG, a name that resonated with primordial fear, a name that seemed to carve itself onto our very souls. Panic seized me. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body felt paralyzed, trapped in the gaze of that pulsating orb. Sarah, next to me, whimpered, her eyes glazed over with a vacant terror. The voice continued, its words twisting into grotesque shapes, forming impossible geometries in my mind. The world around us began to dissolve, the buildings melting into amorphous shadows, the sky swirling with colors that should not exist. The cobblestones beneath our feet crumbled, revealing a bottomless chasm filled with a swirling, iridescent mist. The whispers grew louder, the light from the tree brighter, more blinding. I felt a pulling sensation, a force drawing us towards the chasm, towards the unknown horrors that awaited within. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The light vanished, the whispering ceased, and the world snapped back into focus, though subtly altered, somehow wrong. The oak tree stood silent, its branches still, the square deserted. Sarah stood beside me, trembling, her eyes wide with a terror I mirrored. We didn't speak. We couldn't speak. The experience had burrowed deep into our minds, leaving us shaken and fundamentally changed. We stumbled back to our apartment, the street seeming unfamiliar, the air thick with an oppressive silence. The next morning, we packed our bags and fled Salem, leaving behind the occult shop, the whispering oak, and the terrifying knowledge we had gained. We haven't spoken of that night since, but the whispers still echo in my dreams, a constant reminder of the vast, unknowable horrors that lurk just beyond the veil of our perceived reality. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I swear I can still hear it, the susurrus of YGG, whispering my name. And I wonder, what will happen when it calls again? What will happen when the veil finally tears? Story 5. Story 5, The Whispering Pines. Halloween night, 1987. The air hung thick and cold, carrying the scent of wood smoke and decaying leaves. My best friend, Sarah, and I were 16, invincible, and determined to make this the most memorable Halloween yet. We'd ditched the cheesy town bonfire for a dare, hiking to Whispering Pines, a remote stand of ancient pines known locally as haunted. You sure about this, Becca? Sarah asked, her breath puffing white clouds in the frigid air. I shrugged, feigning bravery. Of course. What's a little ghost story? Inside, though, a nervous tremor danced in my stomach. Whispering Pines had always held an unsettling aura, even in daylight. We'd driven as far as the dirt road allowed, then hiked the last mile, the forest growing increasingly dense and silent around us. The usual autumnal orchestra of crickets and rustling leaves had fallen strangely mute. Only the crunch of our boots on the frost-covered ground broke the oppressive stillness. As we entered the stand of pines, the temperature seemed to plummet. The air grew heavy, almost suffocating, and a peculiar, metallic scent tinged the air. The towering pines blocked out most of the moonlight, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to shift and writhe with a life of their own. Creepy, Sarah whispered, her voice strained. I nodded, my throat suddenly tight. We continued deeper, the silence broken only by the soft sigh of wind through the pine needles, a sound that, in this unnatural stillness, sounded eerily like whispers. We stopped at a small clearing. The ground was bare, devoid of any vegetation, as if something had scorched the earth. In the center stood a gnarled, ancient pine, its branches twisted and reaching like skeletal fingers. "This is it?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a breath. Before I could answer, a faint rustling sound came from the darkness beyond the clearing. We froze, straining to see through the oppressive shadows. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. The only response was the whispering of the pines. Suddenly, a branch snapped nearby. We jumped, spinning around. Nothing. Just shadows. But the sense of being watched intensified, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. "Let's just go," Sarah pleaded, her hand gripping my arm. We turned to leave, but as we did, a low, guttural growl echoed from the darkness, sending a chill down my spine. It wasn't the growl of any animal I'd ever heard. It was deeper, more primal, resonating with a chilling malice. We ran. Blindly, desperately, crashing through the underbrush, our hearts pounding against our ribs. The growling followed, growing closer, seeming to come from all directions. We stumbled out of the pines and onto the dirt road, gasping for breath. The woods behind us remained eerily silent. The growling had stopped. We didn't speak, just ran, the adrenaline pumping through our veins. We reached the car, fumbled with the keys, and sped away, leaving the whispering pines far behind. For weeks after, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. The memory of the oppressive silence, the metallic scent, the guttural growl, it haunted my dreams. I avoided Sarah, unable to face the shared terror of that night. Years passed. Life moved on. But the memory of whispering pines never faded. I never spoke of it again, burying the experience deep within my mind. Then, last Halloween, 30 years later, a local newspaper article caught my eye. A hiker had gone missing in the area of Whispering Pines. The article mentioned a strange, metallic scent reported by search and rescue teams. My blood ran cold. The article didn't mention the silence, the growls, the oppressive feeling of being watched. But I knew. I knew what was out there, lurking in the shadows of those ancient pines. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the whispers had never stopped. They were waiting, patiently, for their next victims. And I wondered, was Sarah next? Had she finally gone back, drawn by some morbid curiosity, some unresolved fear? Or maybe, just maybe, the whispers had finally called her name. The thought hangs over me, a chilling premonition, a question mark etched in the silence of every Halloween night.